Community is sort of what you have in your head as what community you're in. And people joke about New Orleans because in many times New Orleanians have such a keen sense of the high school they went to that we are famous for. You see someone in Paris, say you're from New Orleans, and there's a discussion about the first question is, well, where did you go to high school? And that is talked about as a sign of how deep our ties and roots are, but many people point to that as a sign of a great weakness that we have, because your high school, no matter how great it was, no matter how great that neighborhood was, you were part of a much more powerful community. If, for example, you saw yourself as not the guy from McDonald 35, but the guy from New Orleans, that we, the New Orleans people. Incidentally, my son, who is both a lawyer and an engineer, was working on a project in Singapore. And I went over there twice to visit with him. And you walk around the streets of Singapore and you look at the people, and there are several different kinds of people you look at and say they look a little different from those. There are people who we would call Chinese, who are probably the majority of the people in Singapore. There are people we would call Indians, East Indians, who are probably the second largest group in Singapore, and the third largest group in Singapore are probably people we would call Malayans. And they are the original people of Singapore, because Singapore used to be part of Malaysia. Then there are a bunch of other little groups of people, and that you can look at and say, well, he doesn't look Chinese, he doesn't look Indian, he doesn't look Malayan. I wonder what he is. And I would walk the streets and ask people, what are you? And everyone I asked would look at me funny, and I thought maybe they had trouble understanding my English, because English is their primary language. And I repeat, I say, what are you? And they would look at me funny, and they would say, I'm Singaporean. They were not Chinese to themselves, they were not Indians, they were not Malayans, they were Singaporeans. Now, the first time I actually went twice, I had not read the book. You ought to read the book before you go places. I then read the book about the development of Singapore. When Singapore got its independence from the British, the majority of the people were Chinese, and they were the majority of the educated folks, and they ran a good bit of the business. The next largest group were the Indians, who ran mostly businesses. They were businessmen. And the Malayans were the guys with the guns, because they were policemen and soldiers. Well, that was a terrible situation. The people with the money are Chinese and Indian, and the people with the guns were Malayans. And the first prime minister, who we would have called a Chinese, realized that was not a good situation, and he did a couple of things. He forced what we would call integration, but he almost made it a law that from this day forward, you're not Chinese, you're not Indian, you're not Malaysian, you are Singaporean. Now, incidentally, if you take a look at that country, they got their independence in 1965, and they have done wonders in the mere 52 years since then. You wouldn't believe what they have done with that country. And I think a significant part of why they were so successful is banged into them. This group is not fighting this group. We are all Singaporeans fighting the rest of the world. And with that attitude, a nation that really amounts to no more than being a city of about somewhere between 7 and 9 million people has become one of the great. They probably couldn't beat anyone in a war because they don't have enough people to fight a war. But they are certainly one of the dominant economic powers in Asia, and probably will come somewhere close behind China, India, and then perhaps Singapore. Organizing, first of all, you have to make people think they are part of a community to organize the community. And that's a task sometimes. It's a task. It could be a task because they don't look the same. It could be a task because they come from different backgrounds. It could be a task because they have different religions. It could be a task because they think those people over there have money. I don't have money, so we on a different page. Incidentally, I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. some people say, but I say to people who know the difference, I say I'm from Scotlandville. I don't know if there's anyone here who knows the difference, but Scotlandville once upon a time was the biggest black place in America. There were about 30,000 people, everyone in it was black. There was a little area that probably had about 3,000 people in it that we didn't call Scotlandville, we called it Southern Heights. They were the professors at Southern University, Baton Rouge, and their children, and the few black doctors and lawyers you had in Baton Rouge at the time. There was a highway that separated us, and when I looked across that highway, incidentally, people looked just like me. In fact, some of them went to church with me, but I assumed we were enemies. I assumed that they didn't like me and I didn't like them in return, because they were the Southern Heights people and I was a Scotlandville guy, and we had that tension, and that tension remained until I left Scotlandville and went to Atlanta to go to college, and I realized that the perceived difference between me and those guys in Southern Heights was crazy. Now, at Morehouse, I thought I saw some real differences between me and other folks at Morehouse. And we formed ourselves into little groups, depending on what we thought those differences were, and we pledged fraternities. Dr. Odom and I both happened to pledge Kappa, though we pledged in different places and many years apart. And I just knew I was not like the alphas on campus. We were different, and the Qs over there, they're different. We're totally different. We got nothing to do with them. We are the Kappas, we're special, we're our little group. And I felt that strongly until I graduated from Morehouse. And